Train to the End of the World, Episode 12 Finale Review. End of the line. We finally made it to the end of the line. The train line. But don't worry, this is not a story about finality. It's about new beginnings. Overall, I think this was a very satisfying finale that ends the series on a very strong thematic tone, albeit with some criticisms about pacing and execution. So starting off, the girls realize that Yoka has to be the one to press the button, as the powers affecting the world are tied to her. From how I understand it, 7G power manifested her fears and insecurity into reality. She has to be the one to turn off 7G because the solution is facing herself. The main action of the episode is settled pretty quickly. Rest in peace to all the fallen zombies who were the true MVPs. They were ridiculously helpful. They helped them get the button quickly, they made a bridge, and they prevented the train from being derailed. I don't have any problem suspending my disbelief with this show, so them doing things they shouldn't have been able to, like holding up a train, is absolutely ridiculous, though totally fine with me. But I do think it could have been a little more interesting if they did not solve so many of the problems in the last two episodes with the zombies. Most of the previous stops get referenced, only excluding the mushrooms from what I can remember. I don't see how they could have helped, just off the top of my head, but it does feel like a shame that they got left out. I feel like there could have been some silly way that they could have helped, like maybe infecting some of the guards or something like that. If the berets haven't disappeared, they also could have used that as a fun way of the girls fighting back. The zombies were relied on a little too much, in my opinion, but it's not a big deal. The action was a bit brief since we had to get to the reconciliation, but I'm glad they focused on the more important thing with the time that they had. It could have been better, but it was still a fun final action sequence. Yeah, I gotta say, the setting for this confrontation that we get is very cool and just visually looks awesome. I've praised the visuals multiple times of this show, and I just have to do it one more time because this show just looks absolutely excellent. Buntaro loses here because of his own hubris. Buntaro button mashes too hard and breaks his arm train. Then he assumes quote unquote Pochi will continue to be on his side after revealing that he doesn't really care about Yoka. It turns out that the 7G was eating away at her life, which honestly kind of feels like it was dropped out of nowhere for the sake of quote unquote Pochi turning on him. But like most of the criticisms about how things play out, they do not ruin the scenes at all. Everything is very functional, just a bit convenient and fast, and that just comes down to the pacing. Now we finally get to our girls finally talking it out. Shizuru isn't great at putting feelings into words, as we saw before, but now she is ready to do her best and say what's needed. Shizuru rightly makes it about Yoka rather than herself, saying that the apology for hurting Yoka is more important than Yoka actually forgiving her. Shizuru lashed out at Yoka because she was feeling insecure about herself. Yoka had big dreams and a confidence to pursue them, while she was afraid of things changing, which is what would happen if Yoka left. But doing that just pushed her away. But it is not all about Shizuru's action in this scene. Yoka also had her own problems. Despite genuinely believing in her dream and having the courage to go to Ikebukuro, she was still afraid. That is a natural feeling, and Shizuru's words only reinforced that. So when she pressed the button, the powers enabled her to alter the world how she wanted. This would let her control change rather than fear it. But the powers ended up backfiring, sort of like a monkey's paw. The effects on her health from the powers led to her being manipulated and ending up with a life that was just as repetitive as the life in Agano that she tried to leave. There's also the angle that the powers responded to her strong emotions and calmed them. On the surface, she wanted to pursue change, but deep down she was still afraid. So the powers tried to keep her from anything that would make notable changes to the status quo. So I really like how as this conversation progresses, Yoka's powers change the world around them to fit what they are talking about. Before, we saw the trains following separate paths. This represented Yoka's uncertainty. As the conversation progresses, their environments fit to change what she's focusing on in the moment, such as her memories. Moving on with the conversation, Shizuru gives the encouragement and affirmation to Yoka that she wishes that she could have given before, along with the support from the other girls. They look up at the stars together that they promised under years ago. I think more time setting up Yoka's character could have made it clearer, but I believe the 7G situation in general is a representation of how trying to control the chaotic world is an exercise in futility. Pontaro tried to control Yoka, who controlled the world, but that did not work out for him. With Yoka's mind now cleared, they changed to a setting with a parting sea. Now Yoka only sees one path forward, pressing the button and accepting whatever comes next, knowing that she has the true support of her friends. So in the end, Pontaro gets taken out not by any intentional attack by the gang, but the Swan Hermit accidentally landing on him. While this could feel anticlimactic and is different from a lot of other final villain defeats, I think it fits with the tone of the show and the message. The point of the resolution was Shizuru and Yoka making up, not Pontaro being defeated. And I'll get more into this in a bit. With his defeat and emotions resolved, the button gets pressed and 7G is ended. But this does not bring us back to square one. Everything does not go back to normal. And to me, this is the perfect way to end things. This is better for the theme of change that is heavily talked about in this episode. The 7G period happened. That is a fact. In life, you can't take away the past. All you can do is hope things will change for the better and do your best to make that happen. The characters in the story made mistakes that they cannot reverse. The conflict of the story was resolved by the characters recognizing their mistakes and growing from them. Shizuru had to accept that Agano won't stay the same way forever, such as with Yoka leaving. Change can be scary. The gang encountered many dangerous and frightening things on their journey. But in the end, they got through the adversity, grew from it, and ended up enjoying that process. We must face the adversity that comes with change head on rather than trying to avoid it. This is what Shizuru learned on her journey. She was very headstrong, but when it came to the more serious emotional things, she cowered away. But now she knows that she can't do that. Pontaro was the loser villain because he tried to reject change once it stopped working out for him. When the 7G plan messed up the world, he did not want anything to change in a way that would fall back on him. He made 7G to try to change the world, but he did it in a reckless way that ended up punishing him in the end. We should embrace change, but not in a way that ignores risks and rejects consequences. We have to take responsibility for our actions. Shizuru and Yoka were willing to, but Pontaro was not, and you saw what happened to him. The theme of change also loops back around to the capabilities of transportation. It gives people the opportunity to experience new places and change their lives. The girls were able to reconnect thanks to the train. Now there are new train lines that will take people to new places. The entire world can be considered a new place now. Another bit of imagery concerning the train is that the ED always showed the train driving down a winding path. Now with the last episode, it's a straight line. Like with before, Yoka's mind is made up and everyone's together again, so they have a straight, clear path. The show is meant to be advertising for various trains and transportation companies, if you couldn't tell. I think the show succeeds with flying colors at using that original purpose to tell a strong story that promotes these systems without feeling like it's trying to sell you a service. You can really feel the love and effort that was put into this anime, so it is doing it a disservice to call it like an advertisement for train lines. So just a note on some of the things that changed. Mito goes from having a zombie squad to a simp squad. This is a case of things basically being the same as before, but now they are truly choosing to follow her. This gives her more confidence and feel better about herself as a person. Quote-unquote Pochi ends up turning into a crow. It looks like he was originally a crow rather than a dog, as Pontaro calls him a crow before he gets thrown off the train. But as a bird, he can continue watching over Yoka without the premise of controlling and monitoring her. They can continue to support each other if they desire, or both be free to separate. With everything settled as much as they can be, the girls head back home to Agano. But it may not be an easy ride, as the world is still a bit of an unknown. With this, the girls can have another fun journey on their way back, and this time Yoka can be a proper member of the Katan gang. So I think the second train that the gang sees as they head back to Agano represents new beginnings. Purely from a story standpoint, the train is confirming that the world outside the line has returned, because before they said that everything outside that line did not exist. But there is an important thematic meaning to it too. With 7G in control, the world literally revolved around Yoka. This train shows that that is no longer the case. That's a new train on a new path, independent from the one the gang has been traveling on. Those people are going on their own adventure that will change them. All across the world, people are going on their own unique journeys. We're all growing and changing. So, not everything gets firm explanations, and I also think that is for the best. A lot of the fun of the series was reveling in the unknown and using our imaginations. This ending supports that. We don't know what our crazy world will throw at us, but like the gang says, the more mysteries and uncertainty, the more fun it is. So, one other thing I wanted to look back at some of my predictions and see what came to be and what was wrong. I'm a little sad that my double button press theory didn't bear through. Not really holding it against the story, but I really thought I was onto something interesting. But as far as I can tell, there's just nothing about that. So that was just me. I was right about Buntaro not being redeemed. The man was an asshole until the end, and he got turned into food, aka he's dead. No emotional or additional background for him from this episode. He is exactly as he was presented to be. Whether this is a bad thing or not is, I guess, I would say up to you. I do think he suffered a bit as a result of pacing. It feels like he could have had more to him. But on the other hand, I do think him and the 70s stuff itself were simple on purpose. They were vehicles, pun intended, for the characters and the story. They brought up some explanations about what 7G is, like that being like dark matter or whatever, but we didn't get a firm answer. I was pretty good at figuring out how the world worked, with everything tying back to emotions and desires. I don't think it's needed. The point was its effect, not the thing as itself. Who knows how 7G managed to create a reality bender, but sci fi explanations and the defeat of a big bad villain are not what the story was about. It was about the journey, the growth the characters experienced on that journey, and how that growth allowed the characters to come back together again to support each other. I do think I was correct in seeing the similarities between Girls Last Tour and Shimeji Simulation with this show. I won't go into detail. I will just very highly recommend them to anyone who enjoy this anime and really anyone in general because I love both those shows. They have a lot of tonal and thematic and even some actual in-universe consistencies and similarities. That's really all I'll say. Now for some final thoughts. I won't applaud the show as something like absolutely amazing, but it was a ton of fun. It's not a complex or deeply nuanced story, but I appreciate what it did tell in its short runtime. I loved these characters and the wacky adventures that they went on. It doesn't have explosive highs, but it was consistently a great time that always left me wanting for the next episode. I have no regrets about sticking with it, and I'm really glad that I did. This show got the theorizer brain juices flowing more than most shows do, which is a big compliment, and added a lot to the experience for me. I'd much rather have something like this than something that's just, just visual splendor. I like a show that really makes me think and theorize and just have fun with the world and the characters. That's the kind of thing that I really get attached to. It was incredibly creative and truly unique. It did have some issues with the pacing that were most heavily seen here, but they really did not ruin the experience. I still think one more episode would have been great, but still, I think it's very good for what it is. Setting up the story to be very silly and random also helps to take the edge off of more blatant narrative convenience. Kind of like what I mentioned with the zombies. So I'm very happy to see another anime original being very successful. We've been getting a lot of those this year and last year as well, just in general in more recent time, that are just purely original anime shows. And I really hope that we get more because I think it's really great for the industry. It opens up more opportunities to use anime not just as a medium of advertising the source material and encourages creators to be creative as they don't have to hold themselves to story, visuals, etc. of a source. It's truly free to be a lot more of whatever it wants to be. So then that brings this great series to an end. Thank you very much for taking this ride with me.